What's up, guys? This is Heis, and today we have a little bit of a coal-burning steam locomotive topic to talk about on the channel today. And that is, how did the railroad get coal into the tenders of the engines in the first place? It's not something that is terribly common knowledge and isn't really something that survives as a practice to this day, at least in the way that it used to be. And I've found in discussions with folks at the museum, when they come and ask how they used to do it back in the day, a lot of people are incredulous to think that the railroad would just send an army of dudes with shovels to shovel from a gondola or a bin into a locomotive, but that's what a lot of smaller locations did. That said, some of the bigger locations had some pretty cool stuff, and these days we use a backhoe, as you saw in the thumbnail of the video. So let's jump in, shall we? So I was doing some research around and looking around on the internet to try and find good reference for you, and I found this picture from Jerry Clark of a old Rio Grande Southern coal bin that still existed, at least in the 1990s, located at what was once known as Vance Junction. And so the coal pockets like these would typically be loaded with a gondola of coal coming in, and guys with shovels would transload from the gondola into the bin. So you could see the bin kind of looks like this. Some locations would make it a little bit easier, and they'd have the gondola up on a raised piece of track or a hopper on a raised piece of track. They would shovel with gravity as an assist into the bin, and then either they would have gravity load the tender or they'd have to shovel from the bin into the tender from there. But that's really kind of the genesis of loading coal. Because the first steam engines, you had wood and you would stack wood and everything, and this is the first kind of intermediate. Okay, well, how do we deal with coal? You need to store it in one place and transload it somehow, and that's how they would do it. And now stick around at the end. I've got a fun story from Little Engines and Big Men that we'll finish the video out with about coal shoveling bins and things like that. It's one of the stories that sticks out from the book. But before we get there, let's take a look at some of the more larger accommodations that some of the railroad would have had. Ignore the giant scary margarita mixer behind the rotary snowplow. This is my picture from the rotary charter back in 2020 at the Cumbres and Toltec. You can see the Chama coal tipple, which still exists. Here's another picture of mine from 2021 when we were down with the Rio Grande Southern number 20. Coal gets loaded up via elevator into this giant bin, and then the bin has ramps with chute doors that kind of open up, almost like Railroads Online's coal mine does. And so you could fill locomotive tenders pretty quickly. That said, I've heard that when they last operated the tipples that they were absolutely terrifying, and there's a reason why they don't run it anymore. Probably more so than just how terrifying it was, but definitely a very quick rush of a lot of heavy rock coming out of the darn thing. But larger locations would have stuff like this, and sometimes it would have a dedicated dump track for a dump gondola or a dump hopper for them to come in, spot the car, dump the car directly into a bin that the elevator screw or buckets or what have you could take the coal up and raise it up to above the locomotive. And then some had run-through tracks underneath the tipple or on the sides like this one. There's a lot of different styles, but this is a cool narrow gauge example, and it still exists. This picture is less than 2 years old, if you could believe it. It's still in pretty good shape, primarily thanks to the friends of the Cumbres and Toltec, if I'm correct. So cheers to you guys. One other interesting example that I want to talk about, though, before we get to the modern day, is an interesting thing that the Antonito, Colorado location got on the other end of the Cumbres and Toltec back in the mid-1950s. Mid-1950s, they got what was called the Red Devil coal loader, which was supposed to be a modern engineered solution for loading coal, where they were still loading coal by hand, and it was causing the railroad a whole bunch of problems. So there's a document from the Rio Grande that basically states that in the 1950s in Antonito, their current coal bin setup with a bridge to easily shovel from a gon into a bin to then load into locomotives had really started to deteriorate. And they were wasting a lot of manpower on dudes shoveling things. And so, hey, they asked, can we get something that'll help us load coal faster? And previously, something like a tipple would be a huge expenditure because it's a huge structure and a lot to maintain. In comes the Red Devil, which was designed such that a gondola could be spotted on one track next to it, drop bottom or be shoveled out. I believe these were drop bottoms. and then into a pit the coal would go, and then it would ride up conveyor belts that could then aim to whatever locomotive tender, and it ended up being a much smaller unit for a later era. So this was kind of the in-between from some dudes with shovels to, oh, we built this giant piece of kit, right? Because it's all about, well, the locomotive might need fuel somewhere else, and we can really only afford to put the big structure at big terminal locations a lot of times on the railroad. And so what about for most of us in the modern day? Well, most of us tend to use a backhoe or a tractor or something, which weren't really terribly common or terribly cheap in a lot of the steam era, as diesel tech was still an up-and-coming thing for much of the steam era. So we use a backhoe at the museum. We've had other tractors before, depending on things and stuff, but we own the backhoe now, and it's a really nice machine and seems to run pretty well, knock on wood. And it's pretty fun to try and load coal into the engine. It's definitely something that's relatively new for me. Before I was staff, I'd never operated it. Now that I've been staff, I've operated it a decent amount. And it's definitely a lot of fun to actually get to run. And, you know, it makes you feel like you're 3 years old playing in the sandbox, but instead of the sandbox, it's the coal bin. So we have a bin full of coal, where trucks will come in and they'll dump, you know, like 20 tons of coal at a time when we get a delivery. And then one scoop at a time, you kind of crash the tractor into the pile of coal, more or less, as gently as you can, right? You don't want to damage anything. And then we have to kind of maneuver around some of our other equipment that's out in the yard, because got lots of stuff at the museum. And we go up a big ramp because the backhoe can't actually get high enough to get into 491's tender. Can with the little engines like 346 and 20, you could actually just go right up next to them just from level ground. But to make it easier, we built a big ramp right next to one of our servicing tracks where our ash pit is. And we bring the tractor up, dump the bucket in, and maybe it's 1 scoop of coal, maybe it's 6, kind of depends on where the tender sits at. When we were doing Polar Express, we tended to do maybe 2 every day, and that kind of kept things happy. And that's how we load, and that's how Cumbres and Toltec and a lot of other places load their coal these days, is it's just easiest to go fire up the backhoe, boom, it's not a special piece of equipment, it's something that's general purpose, and it's really well-rounded. And it makes it really easy to fill the engine up pretty quick, particularly if you get a bigger one of those articulated cats or whatever. You could load the K37 tender in like 2 or maybe 3 scoops versus even the bucket on the backhoe. It takes quite a few scoops to fill things up, but it seems to be the easiest and most general purpose solution that we have these days. Now, I did try, for fun, a little fun extra camera angle, and this might be tremendously stupid. I don't know. Backhoe cam. Coal loading cam. I figured it would be funny or I don't know. If anything is ever going to kill these cameras, it's going to be me plowing into a pile of coal with my GoPro getting squished. So, alright. Bucket cam. not the best idea. 10-4. Got it. Look at Choo-Choo. Running into anything. And there's just so conveniently placed a historic piece of cog equipment and a telehandler right where you're worried about smacking into both of them, and then a pothole with a keep off sign. It's a lot to look at all at once. So I promised you I'd read a little bit out of Little Engines and Big Men by Gilbert A. Lathrop earlier. Done it once before on the channel, read some of the stories here, but there's a story about one of the early days of railroading, with particularly the coal bins and sharing the coal. So I figured I would read that little excerpt for you because it seemed appropriate for the video. It's a part of chapter 24, Violent Death. Ugh. Over the narrow gauge, there was no man better thought of or better liked than Paddy Sullivan. If he had an enemy, nobody ever heard about it. Just an affable, twinkling-eyed, smiling Irishman was Paddy Sullivan, who had worked his way up to be a conductor on the 3rd Division. 3rd Division working out of Salida. Working on the coal chutes in Salida was a hot-headed Italian laborer. He was one step above a laborer because he held a contract to keep the bins on the apron chutes filled with coal and also to store coal on the ground against a possible shortage. The coal chute man got swamped and loaded cars piled up on him until there was a shortage of empties. The railroad company, accordingly, hired a gang of men to unload the coal and help the chutes man get caught up, putting conductor Paddy Sullivan in charge of them. Paddy was given several bunk cars for his men, a locomotive, and a caboose. John J. McIver was the engineer for the outfit. John J. McIver was known all over the narrow gauge as its most colorful character. The first day on the job, Paddy decided that they needed a few lumps of coal for the outfit cars. He sent a couple of his laborers to the coal chutes and told them to help themselves to the piles already stored there by the chutes man. This fellow had walled up his big chunks and shoveled the smaller stuff into the center, forming a sort of yard built of coal. Paddy's men had just got a good start toward filling a few buckets, apparently from the outside walls, when the chutes man spied them. He came down spitting venom and curses and ordered them away. The men did not argue. They left the irate chutes man and returned empty-handed to the caboose where Paddy supervised things. They explained what happened. "Sure, 'tis all good company coal. And what business has he refusing us a few chunks?" Paddy said as he got to his feet. He walked up to where the chutes man was standing guard over his precious coal. Paddy did not get rough or hard-boiled. He merely told the chutes man that they needed the coal for the outfit cars and were going to take it. A lot of cars in that era had coal-burning stoves to keep warm, and shocker, in the mountains of Colorado, it's really, really cold. And a lot of our cars still have coal-burning stoves, and you start them on wood, and then you keep them going with a little slack coal, whatever is maybe a little small for what we want in the engine, take it to the cars. So, completely reasonable request to go get some of the coal from the company store for the company cars. Anyway, he merely told the chutes man that they needed the coal for the outfit cars, and were going to take it. Instead of making Paddy a reply, the chutes man jerked out a heavy-calibered 6-shooter and shot Paddy Sullivan. As you do, I guess. John McIver had witnessed the whole thing. He was beside Paddy when the conductor breathed his last. The chutes man rushed to town and gave himself up. McIver forgot for the time that he was a railroad engineer. He appointed himself a being of vengeance. Less than 30 minutes from the time Paddy Sullivan was shot and killed, McIver stormed the jail with a picket gang of burly railroaders. They hauled the chutes man outside, dragged him down the tracks. On a crossing warning sign just above the bridge over the Arkansas River, they hanged him by the neck until he was as dead as Paddy Sullivan. It was a different time, ladies and gentlemen. One of the jokes about this book is it's Little Engines and Big Lies. So there may have been some stretch there, but I would bet that there's also some truth to that story. So anyways, guys, I hope you liked a little bit of a look at kind of the different levels of loading coal and how we do it now versus how it used to be done. And a little fun story from Little Engines and Big Men. Thanks for watching.